Long before ballots and polling stations, humans made group decisions by consensus. In tribal councils and village gatherings, elders or warriors would raise hands, shout approval, or mark agreement with stones or sticks. The first organized voting systems appeared in ancient Greece, around the 5th century BCE. In the city-state of Athens, male citizens, about 10 to 20% of the population, gathered in the ecclesia to vote on laws, war, and leadership. Their votes were often cast by a show of hands, or with pebbles dropped into urns. Yet, this early democracy was exclusive. Only free male citizens of Athens had the right to participate in the political process, while women, slaves, and foreigners, known as metics, were excluded from voting or holding office. This limitation reflected the social hierarchies and gender norms of ancient Greek society. Still, the idea that ordinary citizens, not kings, aristocrats, or divine rulers, should collectively make decisions about laws and governance was revolutionary for its time. It laid the philosophical groundwork for modern democratic ideals, inspiring later political thinkers and movements that sought to expand equality and participation. Meanwhile, in ancient Rome, elections were used to select magistrates and consuls, who were key officials responsible for administering government, commanding armies, and upholding the law. The Roman Republic's political system combined democratic and aristocratic elements, as citizens gathered in assemblies to cast their votes. However, citizens were divided into classes based on wealth and social status, such as the patricians, aristocratic families, and plebeians, commoners. Voting was organized through the centuriate assembly, where wealthier citizens were grouped into fewer but more influential voting units, meaning their votes carried greater weight. This system reflected and reinforced Rome's rigid class structure, illustrating how political participation was limited by economic standing. Over time, these inequalities fueled social tensions and reform movements, revealing the deep connection between wealth, power, and governance in the ancient world. When the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, its centralized government collapsed, and Europe's political systems gradually turned feudal, based on a rigid hierarchy of kings, nobles, knights, and peasants. Power became fragmented, with local lords controlling land and offering protection in exchange for loyalty and labor. This system emphasized personal allegiance rather than civic participation, and authority rested in birthright rather than public choice. Monarchs and the church held most political and moral power, while ordinary people, especially peasants and serfs, had little to no influence over laws or leadership. For centuries, governance was determined by inheritance and warfare, not by elections or citizen assemblies, marking a long retreat from the democratic ideals of ancient Greece and Rome. However, seeds of representation began to sprout within medieval institutions, particularly in England. In 1215, a group of rebellious nobles compelled King John to sign the Magna Carta, a landmark document that placed legal limits on royal authority and asserted that even the monarch was subject to the law. Although the Magna Carta originally protected only the rights of the nobility, it introduced the revolutionary notion that rulers must govern with the consent of those they rule. Over the next few centuries, this principle evolved as English kings called councils, initially to raise taxes and settle disputes, which gradually developed into Parliament. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Parliament had two chambers, the House of Lords, representing the nobility and clergy, and the House of Commons, representing knights and townspeople. This early form of representative government laid a crucial foundation for modern democracy by institutionalizing the idea that authority should be shared and that the governed deserve a voice in political decision-making. Elsewhere, similar bodies appeared: the Cortes in Spain, the Estates General in France, the Diet in the Holy Roman Empire. Though initially dominated by nobles and clergy, these assemblies paved the way for the notion that political legitimacy comes from representation. The 17th and 18th centuries marked a period of profound intellectual and political transformation known as the Enlightenment, an era when reason, science, and human rights began to challenge traditional authority. Thinkers such as John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Baron de Montesquieu questioned the divine right of kings and the legitimacy of absolute monarchies. John Locke, England, argued that all individuals possess natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that governments exist only to protect those rights. If rulers violated them, citizens had the right to rebel. Rousseau, France, expanded on this by introducing the concept of the social contract, asserting that legitimate political authority comes only from the collective will of the people. Montesquieu emphasized the separation of powers, dividing government into branches to prevent tyranny. Together, these ideas redefined the relationship between rulers and the ruled. They inspired new visions of society based on equality, liberty, and civic participation, laying the philosophical foundation for later democratic revolutions such as the American Revolution, 1776, and the French Revolution, 1789. The Enlightenment thus transformed government from a privilege of kings into a responsibility to the people. These ideas ignited revolutions. The American Revolution, 1776, established a republic where citizens elected their leaders, though only white male property owners could vote. The French Revolution, 1789, cried for liberté, égalité, fraternité, briefly introducing universal male suffrage before sliding into chaos and dictatorship. During this era, voting evolved from a privilege for elites to a symbol of freedom and equality. Ballots began to replace public declarations, protecting voters from intimidation or retaliation. The 1800s were a century of struggle for suffrage, the right to vote. In 19th century Britain, democracy evolved through a series of Reform Acts that slowly widened political participation. The Reform Act of 1832 was the first major step. It redistributed parliamentary seats to reflect growing industrial cities and extended the vote to middle-class property owners, though the majority of working people were still excluded. The Second Reform Act, 1867, broadened suffrage further, granting many urban working-class men the right to vote. Finally, the Third Reform Act, 1884, extended this right to rural laborers, bringing Britain closer to a system of mass participation, though women and the poorest citizens remained disenfranchised. Alongside these legislative changes, the Chartist movement, 1838 to 1857, emerged as a powerful working-class campaign for political reform. Chartists demanded universal male suffrage, secret ballots, equal electoral districts, annual parliaments, and payment for members of parliament so ordinary men, not just the wealthy, could serve in government. Although most of these demands weren't met immediately, the movement's ideas deeply influenced later reforms and helped shape the principles of modern representative democracy.